Adam, if you get time and you're able to, feel
Copy that.
You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
The time has come for America to hear the truth.
We are going to stand with them, and not only are we going to fight for their rights, but we're going to stand up for our rights here in our state, in our homes, and in our community.
One day longer, one day stronger. One day longer, one day stronger.
Because the future of labor's rights in the United States of America is not going to be decided in the courts. It's not going to be decided in Congress. It's not going to be decided on talk radio, and it sure is not going to be decided on Fox News.
For the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever.
Tennessee Valley, this is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator, Adam Keller. It is Tuesday, November 30th, 2021, and we are broadcasting live online and on the radio on WZZA in Tuscumbia, Muscle Shoals, Alabama, from the Spice Radio studio in the heart of the Tennessee Valley, Huntsville, Alabama. Tonight we are talking big updates on the Bessemer Amazon campaign. We are talking about union elections and the PRO Act, education, vaccine mandates, and unions with former co-host, current friend of the show, and president of the Machinists Local 44, David Story, and how the labor movement ought to relate to the Democratic Party with Hamilton Nolan, a labor reporter from In These Times magazine. All this and more on today's program. But first, if you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up the show on WZZA, or if you want to see what we're up to throughout the week, you can find us all over the place online. We are on Twitter. We are on Facebook. All at the Valley Labor Report. All of our broadcasts are streamed and archived on YouTube and uploaded later as a podcast. So you can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can find us on YouTube, again, all at the Valley Labor Report. You can also support the show by being a monthly donor on patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. We have stickers. We have bumper stickers. You can find those at our website, thevalleylaborreport.org. I mean, we're just all over the place, So make sure that you find us there. Adam, glad to have you. You were out of pocket last week. Glad to have you back.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Happy you're back. Love being able to talk to Adam. He's got some good stuff for us later in the program. But first, let's talk about the update in the Bessemer, Alabama Amazon campaign. We had big news. I think it was yesterday or maybe the day before. I guess it was yesterday because yesterday was a Monday. The NLRB the National Labor Relations Board, has agreed with the recommendation of the regional officer to throw out the results of the last election in Bessemer because of egregious interference and a blatant disregard for the election process that made laboratory conditions necessary for a fair election impossible. So Amazon workers in Bessemer will get another election. This has been what has been expected for months now because of the absolutely blatant disregard for the law that the boss had at Bessemer, at Amazon in Bessemer. So this is what people have been expecting, but it's now final. The decision has been made. Workers will get another chance at a fair and free election. The date and method has not been determined yet. Last time, the union was pushing for mail-in ballots, and I believe that they are going to be okay with in-person voting this time, as long as it's, at a fair location. The date has not been determined yet, but in the NLRB's announcement, they said that it is probably going to be in the spring. So be on the lookout for that. And of course, the boss's propaganda outlets have already pounced on the announcement, saying that the campaign was an out-of-state effort because politicians outside Alabama supported the workers while politicians in our state sat on their asses. The writer who said that was invited to come on the show, and of course, we heard what you might call radio silence from him because attacking the campaign as an out-of-state effort is absolutely nonsensical if you have read anything other than Amazon press releases. The campaign started with Alabama workers at Amazon coming to an Alabama union, the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union's Mid-South Council, that represents some 10,000 workers in the South, including Alabama butchers, Alabama warehouse workers, and Alabama poultry workers, among others. They also now represent brake pad manufacturers as a result of a successful election here in Alabama some time ago. And the lead organizer was an Alabama youth pastor, and most of the organizers involved were workers at RWDSU, Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union work sites in Alabama. This was an Alabama campaign led by Alabama workers that went up against the most powerful corporation in the world and scared them so badly that they spent tens of millions of dollars. The best estimate that I've been able to find puts it at something near $30 million that was spent by Amazon to try to railroad the workers and try to rob them of their opportunity for a free and fair election. And not only did they spend millions of dollars and hire outside parties, they try to make this sound like an out-of-state effort, but who did Amazon hire? Amazon hired an out-of-state law firm that specializes in union busting and paid them millions of dollars to do that. I have a friend who worked for one of the only union-side law firms in the state of Alabama for some time, and he said that it was amazing just how much Amazon's lawyers did in this case. He said he read some of their briefs, some of the things that they submit. I forget what he calls them, but some of the things that they submitted to the court, and he was like, I can't imagine how much these lawyers' fees would be. This is insane. I told him that money's cheap when you're the richest man in the world. So not only did they spend all that money, but they broke the law. These Alabama workers scared Amazon so bad that they were not willing to interfere with the election in ways that are legal, which is many. I mean, the ways, and we'll get into this later in the show, but the ways that you can interfere in an election and still be above board as far as the law is concerned is frankly horrific. The things that go on in a union election by the boss are things that we would never in a million years accept in an election for public office, but we accept it in union elections. Why? Because, that's the boss's domain. So it's really insane. So
Jacob, before you move on, I wanted to just point out that, one of the most common criticisms of unions is that it's going to drive up costs for the company.
Yeah.
But here we have the company just blowing millions to defeat this effort, and you can't convince me that somehow that was cost effective. And, I think you also nailed something, which is there's a cottage industry of union busting, especially among law firms. And lawyers, they work by billable hours. So if they've got an opportunity to rack up those hours, of course they're going to take it.
Yeah, absolutely. I just did some quick back-of-the-envelope math here. $30 million divided by 6,000 employees, which is the latest estimate on how many people were working there at the time of the election, would be $5,000 per employee. Instead of, instead of doing that, they could have written a huge check to these workers, bought them all a nice car, but they wanted to spend all that money so that they could continue to exploit them and continue to bargain with them individually. The reason that is such a good deal for the boss is that when you bargain individually, you have much less power than when you bargain collectively. And that's obvious when you think about, okay, if all, 12 of the people at the small business that I work for, let's say, if all 12 of us go and bargain together, we have a lot more power than if all 12 of us go individually. And if we go individually, we can be whipsawed against one another, be pitted against each other, instead of all working together to bring everyone up, instead of clawing over the bodies of our brothers and sisters. So, like I said, Amazon pulled lots of dirty tricks, some of them legal and some of them not. And the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades has a great video that is going to show you, that shows you some of the things that workers at Amazon had to go through. So, Adam, if you could play that for us.
Imagine this. You're an American worker and you decide you want to exercise your right to collectively bargain in your workplace. That it's in your best interest to come together with coworkers to take on issues impacting everyone, like pay, benefits, and more. Rather than struggling alone, you approach some coworkers to see if they're interested in taking on some of the same workplace issues together. You assume that with a simple majority vote, 50+1, you could choose workplace representatives the same way you vote in an election. But if you're a worker in the US, this is where it all goes wrong. More than half of American workers are threatened with job loss if they vote for workplace representation, and 1 in 5 are fired. Then, 90% of American workers who seek to collectively bargain are forced to sit through mandatory meetings to be told by your employer about why workplace democracy and collective bargaining is bad. On average, employers hold 9 captive audience meetings during the election campaign. At the same time, you'll be bombarded with communications from firms outside your workplace who never reveal themselves, yet were hired to do nothing but convince you the improvements you seek are wrong. Even if you make it past all of this and the workplace election is successful, your employer can refuse to recognize the results of the election or refuse to negotiate. This happens in more than half of all successful workplace elections. Workplace elections happen nearly every day in the United States. But sadly, due to our fundamentally broken labor laws, workplace elections are deeply undemocratic, and the deck is stacked against workers in every single one of them. We need to defend the rights of Americans to collectively bargain fairly, and must ensure the fight for voting rights is extended to the elections that happen in workplaces every single day. We can do this by fixing our labor laws and ensuring the passage of the PRO Act this year. It is our right to have our voices heard and to vote both inside and outside the workplace, and we must fight again to ensure these rights are recognized.
All right, that video was courtesy of our brothers and sisters in the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. Folks, you should follow them on Twitter. They are constantly putting out really good videos like that. The Twitter is @GoIAT. IUPAT, at Go IUPAT. They have got some really good videos. Honestly, they have the best and most consistent, like, short, informative videos on social media that you're going to be able to find. They're really, really good. And, the passage of the PRO Act is such an important is such an important thing to be able to even the playing field between workers and bosses in this country, because, like I said, there are so many things that are legal for bosses to do that is not going to, and then not only is there all sorts of things that are legal, like they talked about the captive audience meetings. That's legal. Your boss can make you, at threat of termination, sit through however many hours of propaganda and threats and innuendos that they want with no retaliation. That is totally legal. And just think about that in any other election. Think about if Democrats or Republicans had the authority to round up any and all voters that they wanted and make them, at threat of job loss, sit through a presentation about how good they are and how bad the other people are. That's just totally goes against democratic values, does not make sense. And yet it's legal. And then where things are not legal, there's no penalties. There are literally no fines associated with breaking provisions of the NLRA. The penalty for Amazon in breaking the law as flagrantly as they did is just having another election. That's it. There's no fines. There's no other penalty. They just have to have another election. And like I said, money is cheap when you're the richest man on earth, but money and time is not cheap when you're an organization of normal, everyday, working people, and you have to go through this again instead of just having had a fair and free election from the beginning. I mean, it's the laws are totally stacked against workers in this country, and we've got to do something about that. So before we go on to our next topic, I do want to thank our sponsors. We've got the sponsors are starting to trickle in. We've got, of course, the people. We have about 40 people every month who donate to us on Patreon and help keep us going. We really appreciate y'all's support. We couldn't do it without you. The International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers is a sponsor of the show. We appreciate their support, and they're helping us stay on the air, as well as the Ironworkers Local 477 out of Sheffield, Alabama. Y'all will know our brothers and sisters out there, Eddie Mitchell and Jeb Miles, good friends of the show. We talked to Otis Berryhill last week about apprenticeships. Good guy. And if you want to be a sponsor of the show, then holler at us. You can email us. You can find us on social media. You just there are ways. Google the Valley Labor Report, and you'll find ways to get in touch with us. You can sponsor the show, help us stay on the air, and if you're an individual and you just want to support the show, you can find us on Patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. If you're a member of a union or an organization or a business that wants to advertise or sponsor the show, reach out to us, and we'll get you taken care of. Okay. So Emmett Jamar, unfortunately, passed away. I believe it was last week, right, Adam?
Yeah, November 18th.
He passed away November 18th. And Adam, I'm just going to give the floor to you because you knew him much better than I did. But you were talking to me about him before the show, and I was really inspired. I hate that I had not been able to meet him while he was alive.
Yeah, I really appreciate just having a couple of minutes here to speak on Emmett Jamar. Those of you who are listening locally on WZZA, I'm sure the name definitely rings a bell. You're probably well aware of his legacy and his accomplishments. So Emmett Jamar really was one of those titans of the Alabama labor movement and the civil rights movement, for that matter. When you look at his list of accomplishments, it was vast. It spanned not just through labor, but through education, business, racial justice. So I wanted to just share a few of the things that he accomplished and I think it's important, and here's the old history teacher in me coming out, but I think it's important that we do recognize those who came before us and who built the foundation that we're resting on, and that we can kind of carry that torch. So a few things I wanted to mention about Emmett Jamar. In Colbert County, you probably remember that he was a longtime county commissioner for 28 years. He was the first African-American elected to the Colbert County Commission. He also was the first African-American teacher to integrate Coffee High School. And, despite growing up in the Jim Crow era, he was able to get bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, a brilliant, brilliant man who could teach science, chemistry, physics, biology, but, quickly became a leader in the civil rights and labor movements here in Alabama. And he went on to work for the Alabama Education Association. He started off with the ASTA, which is the Alabama State Teachers Association. Much like our schools and the rest of our society in Alabama, even our unions and professional organizations were segregated. So what we saw throughout the NEA, the National Education Association, in the 60s, was the efforts to merge the white and black teacher organizations. And Emmett Jamar was instrumental in that here in Alabama. It was 1969 when the Black Teachers Organization, ASTA, merged with the AEA. At the time, AEA was dominated, not just by whites, but by superintendents and administrators, especially. So Emmett was a major player there in integrating these two organizations, and it's one of the success stories in Alabama. If you look at what was happening in our state in 1969, it's pretty amazing that folks like Emmett and Dr. Joe Reed and Paul Hubbard and those other leaders of the time were able to merge these two organizations. Of course, it wasn't easy, but honestly, extremely successful, especially compared to other southern states. And that legacy continues, and that's why, AEA has a much stronger membership than some of our neighboring states here in the South in terms of the NEA affiliates. So, a couple of things that Emmett did through that role. Not only was he a fierce advocate for teachers, but also the support staff. My own mother-in-law was a support staff member in his district and worked closely with him for decades, and certainly has shared many, many stories with me and my family about just what a brilliant man, what a fierce advocate he was. He was someone that you could count on to fight for the little guy. That's really what he dedicated his life to. And he stood up not just for those members that he was, employed to represent, but he stood up for his colleagues. And I think that's very important. In this show, we have discussed a little bit about staff unions. And a lot of people on the outside may not realize that, unions have employees, and those employees tend to be unionized themselves because naturally you should practice what you preach. But as with any workplace, that really boils down to power and whether or not you can hold employers accountable to practice what they preach. So Emmett Jamar was instrumental in establishing the Alabama Professional Staff Organization. That is the employees of AEA. That's their union. And not only did he help establish this union, he actually led the strike of these employees of AEA. Back during the 70s, this was like the height of Dr. Hubbard, Dr. Reed. Those two guys were major, major players in Alabama politics, especially at that time. And Emmett was just fearless and was able to lead his colleagues who worked for AEA on a strike. It was the first strike of NEA employees in the South. And I think that really speaks to his courage, the fact that you would not only go up against superintendents and politicians that you're paid to do battle with, but that he would do it with his own boss, who was so powerful at the time. So I think that is a lasting legacy, and Emmett is well known among the National Staff Organization, the union that represents employees of NEA and NEA affiliates. He's named the Godfather He helped establish a place and a caucus for black employees of these unions. He served at the national level, executive board, you name it. He was there as a union leader for his colleagues, in addition to his day job of representing the educators of Northwest Alabama, Colbert County, Lauderdale County, Limestone County, all those many school districts contained in that region. Emmett actually worked for 43 years with AEA, so you can imagine what he saw and what he dealt with. In addition to that, he was a leader in the NAACP, a leader in Democratic Party politics, one of the longest-serving county commissioners. So both not just in labor, but with racial justice, with normal electoral politics, so to speak. The man was a legend, and I think he really paved the way for more integration inside of our schools, but also inside of the organizations that represent school employees. And also just wanted to, send my best to the Jamar family. His daughter, Lakiska, actually succeeded him in that AEA Uniserv Director District 1 position, which is kind of cool that she was able to step up and take over that role. And Lakiska is also a great advocate. She's definitely, making her father proud and upholding that legacy of fighting for rank-and-file educators. So I wanted to send my best to the Jamar family. And for those of you who, maybe haven't heard of him before, recommend you take a couple minutes, check it out, brush up on your history there, because this was a man who dedicated his life to building a better Alabama. And, all of us can be thankful for him for the good work that he did throughout his life.
Yeah, and you mentioned that his daughter succeeded him in a role, and WZZA's own Tori Bailey succeeded him as county commissioner. Isn't that what you said?
I believe so. Yeah, and Tori spoke at the funeral this weekend and did a fantastic job, and really helped all of us who were there to better appreciate his accomplishments and the way in which he mentored so many people. Not just Tori and Lakiska, but educators and union organizers and aspiring politicians, people all over the state. He was a true educator at heart, regardless of whatever job he held.
Right. Yeah, that's. It's really amazing how many stories are there that go untold and that people don't really know about, and it's like you said, it's worth looking into folks like him, in our local communities that do the work that goes oftentimes, unrecognized.
Absolutely. Thank you for giving me just a couple of minutes to do that, because especially those of you who are in Northwest Alabama, you have a lot to be proud of.
So you are listening to WZZA. We are almost at the bottom of the hour. My name is Jacob Morrison. I am here with my co-host, Adam Keller. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report on WZZA here in Tuscumbia, Muscle Shoals, Alabama, and online on YouTube. Our next topic, we are going to be talking to a friend of the show. Now he's a friend of the show, but everybody knows him. His name is David Story. David, welcome back, brother. It's good to talk to you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. So, yeah, like I said, everybody knows David. He was a host of the show for the first year that we were on the air, a little more than a year. He is currently... back
that up. This say co-founder.
Co-founder.
Okay, this makes sure Mr.
Sure
David Story gets the credit he deserves.
That's right. And he was and is the president of the Machinists Union Local 44. They represent 350 workers at the United Launch Alliance in Decatur. They manufacture rockets, and that's why he's with us tonight, because ULA has been, my jaw has just dropped at the stories that you've told me, David, they've been simply malevolent in dealing with y'all about this vaccine mandate stuff. And look, the vaccine mandate is there are some people among whom this is a touchy subject. Okay, so we'll get to the touchiness maybe here in a bit, but starting from the beginning, as a first principle, in any workplace, this ought to be the case, but in a union workplace with a union contract, this is a bedrock of good faith, cooperation between labor and management. And that is that any change in the working environment has to go through negotiation. And David, my understanding is that y'all went through negotiation with the employer, and you had made an agreement that there were certain exceptions to the mandate that would be given, and as some of which I don't think anybody would disagree with. But before we go there, I guess really quickly, what can you lay out the process of what that looks like when an employer, especially when it's like a government mandated change, when they want to make a change in the workplace? What is the process for those negotiations, and why is it important that everybody get that, even if it's a policy that we like? Even if, let's say, you, listener, support vaccine mandates, you should still support bargaining over the conditions of the mandate. David, can you walk us through what happens there, some of the mechanics?
I mean, yeah, they just reach out to us and tell us that there's a policy that they would like to institute. And generally, an official letter to bargain can be sent, or we can just make a request and say, well, we're going to bargain over that, yeah. And I mean, it can be anything, it can be, we're going to ban hats in the workplace. We don't want anybody wearing hats anymore. Could be a number of things, but in this case, it was a vaccine mandate, and just so we're clear, we're following the vaccine mandate. Our bargaining was part of the vaccine mandate. It wasn't that we're trying to skirt the vaccine mandate, because the mandate includes a portion for those that have deeply held religious or significant medical reasons for being exempt.
Right.
And so, that it follows the federal mandate perfectly, what we negotiated and what we agreed to. They're just refusing to follow up to what they put their signature on.
Right. And so y'all negotiated that and agreed to it. And we should make mention that for the people for whom exceptions were agreed to be made, even though they're now not following what they agreed to, the exceptions that were agreed to, people that didn't get the vaccine would have had to undergo weekly testing. Is that right?
Weekly testing, masks, they'll still have to wear masks. I mean, yeah. I don't know what more. I don't know how much more. We've been working as essential Department of Defense workers for the last 2 years in this facility without a vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
There has, in the entire 2 years, there's not been one case that has been contracted at this facility, because we work together from the get-go to ensure the safety of all the employees. And now, it's a scam.
Right. Well, so, and the scam is that they're saying that they're doing this presumably for the safety of the employees, but what's actually happening is that there are a total of 13 out of, like I said, 350 machinists. There are a total of 13. So we're talking about, what is that? 3%? 3% of the workforce, 97% of the workforce then is vaccinated. And we're talking about 3% of the people who had exceptions that they requested, and all of the exemptions were denied. Is that right?
Yeah, well, there's still a few on medical that are in the facility that are still, they're being tested, and they're following the process. but they're still under review. So they're still providing a lot of information.
Have there been any people that have been terminated yet?
Not yet. We've negotiated that they'll keep their health insurance while they're on administrative leave till we solve these grievances. And luckily they've lived up to that so far, but that's liable to change at any minute as well, because we had a signed document saying that they would accept the exemptions, and they've refused to do that. So who knows?
This is unpaid administrative leave?
Unpaid administrative leave. Yeah. So they're basically just being hung out to try through Thanksgiving and Christmas, and it's like I told you whenever I talked to you, I'm not anti-vax. You know me. I was, because I was in the defense industry, I was able to get my vaccine before most people my age were. And I was the first one to get it. I'm just as quickly as I could.
Right.
But the problem is, like the guy I was telling you about that's got leukemia, that's been on chemo for the last 4 months. His doctors told him, don't get it. Don't get it. Another guy that I work with side by side has a blood disorder that he's almost died from. The doctors had to fill out 12 pages of information and submit it. So we've went through all these hoops that they've asked for us to go through, and they said, "I'll screw you,"
Right. And I mean, that's the and you mentioned, I believe, that the fellow who had leukemia has had COVID. I mean,
he also brought in a serology report showing that his antibody load is higher than the average antibody load of somebody that's had the vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's like just total vindictiveness at this point, because there's no reason to actually try to go through with this. For one, the actual mandate is not enforceable at this time because of the courts. So they can't say that, the government's making me do this. This is totally their prerogative. And in fact, the state government has passed a vaccine mandate ban, for which there was supposed to be guidance last week from the Alabama Department of Labor. I was able to speak to the Labor Secretary of Alabama last week when I was down in Birmingham, and he said that guidance was supposed to be out last week, and I meant to check before the show, and I forgot. So maybe, David, that's something that you
I haven't seen it yet.
He said that it was supposed to come out Friday, so maybe that'll be homework for both of us. But so what is the recourse then? Like, what is the union's plan to address these issues? I mean, this is a person that we're talking about, a guy who's got leukemia, who his doctor is telling him he should, he's got reason not to get the vaccine. We're talking about a guy with cancer. We're talking about a guy with a blood disorder. There has never been anybody that has said 100% of the people need to get vaccinated. That's just never been an argument. It's always been that everybody who can get vaccinated ought to, in part to protect the people that can't get vaccinated, not so that we can throw them out on the street and kill them. I mean, it's so I'm sorry. It's so frustrating. And the CEO of ULA is a big conservative donor. He funds Yellowhammer News. You see his ads and their press releases all the time on Yellowhammer and on these talk radio places. And of course, none of them are they're not even really talking about that, despite the fact that this is, the workers have been out there protesting, and this has been an issue. So what is the union's plan to make sure that these workers are able to keep their jobs?
I mean, we're just going to keep progressing through the arbitration process. Unfortunately, the company's refused on several instances to give us information requests. When we've done information requests, it's just been a constant fight. It's been a constant fight. So they're dragging their feet as long as they can. Unfortunately, most of the listeners to the show know the arbitration process is absolute crap. It takes forever, but our hands are tied, and that's the only way for us to fight it. I know there's some employees on their own that have went out and filed suit. I've heard that's kind of iffy, but as far as the union goes, we'll fight it to the bitter end. And but it's probably going to be at best February, March before we can get in to see an arbitrator because of the holidays.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I mean, that's not. It's just so frustrating, and I can't. I mean, there's really no, like, it just doesn't make sense. They've been hiring cops because of the protests to stand guard, for 24 hours a day, I think you said. So it's not money, because the tests cost much less than the money. And like you said, it's not safety, because y'all worked for 2 years without a vaccine. And the people who don't have vaccines are going to be required, and they are required to do these testing and social distancing and masking protocol, and they're only like 3% of the workforce. I mean, it's just, there's
just to be clear, let me clarify, because that's kind of misleading. There are 3% of the represented workforce. Now, my understanding was, I don't ever want to come on a show and mislead, or for people to feel like they got the wrong information on the show. My understanding was, and I'm not privy to this information because they're not represented employees, but we're roughly outnumbered 6-1, represented versus salary folks at this facility. So my understanding, and a lot of the engineering staff have been recent hires from college because of the way that the company treated the engineering staff that were here. So my understanding is there's quite a large number of younger, less than 10-year out of college engineers that had asked for exemptions, and they've lumped that number in whenever they talk to the media. But, as you know, and as I know, I don't really care about at-will employees. They're not on our contract. What they do as salary that's up to them. They don't have a contract, and they don't negotiate collectively.
Exactly. They're at-will employees. What happens to them is totally the prerogative of the boss.
Irrelevant.
It's irrelevant to what they. I mean, they've got no right, despite right to work being the law that everybody says to like. They've got no right to work. You have a right to work, David, but they do not have a right to work. They
and
can't.
I don't mean to put if they want to join,
they should join.
I've got cards.
Yeah.
Come see me. I've talked to them numerous occasions over the past several years, and we've come close to getting them organized. Not yet. Maybe. Hey, if you're listening, I got cards. Come see me.
Right. Yeah, but because they don't have a contract, because they have no just cause provision in their contract saying that they've got, I mean, they're at-will employees. They can be fired for any reason or no reason at all. So,
and that's something I wanted to emphasize real quick, because, as dire as this situation is that you're describing, David, the flip side to it is these handful of employees, these members that you were assisting, they have you. They have the union's backing. They have language in this contract that is being violated, but is there nonetheless, as opposed to these other folks you're mentioning who have no recourse. And so, as kind of outgunned as you are on this fight, there is a fight to be had. And I think that speaks to that broader issue that we speak on time again is, having a union is better than not having a union.
Right.
Just bottom line. And I think this is a good example where even with the union, the employer is acting egregiously, but you still have a puncher's chance in this fight. And I do think that's just so disturbing that, the company would agree to this language. They would agree in a legally binding contract that they will honor exemptions. And here you have, these two cases are, these are not people who are just playing games because they're anti-vax. And I get that there are people like that in workplaces across the country, but obviously this is not the case. So, I appreciate what you're doing to support those members.
Yep. Thanks.
All right.
Yeah. And I don't mean to sound so despondent or, depressed over it, but it's frustrating, because this is the holidays, and anybody most of these folks are family members,
Mm-hmm.
They've got kids.
Yeah.
They got,
No,
it's
you've got a right to be frustrated. It's frustrating. It's BS. I almost said I almost said something
yeah.
worse, but it's. I mean, putting a person who's got leukemia on unpaid administrative leave, who has had COVID, it's like
Who is
evil.
following doctor's orders?
Yeah.
I like how do they go to sleep at night? I don't know.
Yeah.
But
and how much? If we got like a minute left, I would like to give an example.
Sure.
They hire these doctors. My job requires me to have a physical every year, have eye exam every year, have a hearing exam every year. About 5 years ago, I had to go in for my physical. The nurse, the ULA nurse, had put the paperwork in the door for the doctor to come in. He gives me the physical, fills everything out. So as I sat in there waiting in the room, I went out there and grabbed my file out of the door just to see what was in it. Lo and behold, ULA had went through and had already filled out all the answers that the questions that the doctor was supposed to ask me. They had already went through and given all the proper answers for my physical. So the doctor just had to sign his name. So this is the kind of people that you're dealing with. They just buy off doctors. In other words, my physical meant nothing. They had already done all the paperwork for it.
Yeah, these are not people that care about the health of their workers. That's for sure.
No.
David, thanks for your time. We really appreciate it. If you want to see more about what they're doing, you can follow him on Twitter at Radical Unionist. That's spelled RADICL Unionist. You can follow the Machinists Union Local 44 on Twitter and Facebook to keep up with their fight, and we'll be updating you as the fight goes on. So our next and final guest of the program, we're going to be talking to Hamilton Nolan, a labor reporter for In These Times magazine. He is he's fantastic. You've really got to follow him on Twitter. You should follow and subscribe to In These Times magazine. In These Times gives free print subscriptions to union members. But if you're a union member, you can probably afford to actually pay for it, and you should, because it's good, and these people do good work. And he had a really good piece last month about organizing in Mississippi that I would encourage everybody to read. But today, In These Times released a kind of a quick op-ed from Hamilton, and so I wanted to bring him on to talk about that. So Hamilton, thanks for joining and taking the time to talk to us tonight. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, man.
Absolutely. So the title of your piece is "Which Side Are You Democrats On?" And I think that really, that really lays out kind of where you're going to be going with this piece. And the gist of it is, right, that Democrats aren't doing, they're not doing enough. And so as a labor movement, we should really be more skeptical of the Democrats as an institution. We should, or at least be more skeptical about the prospect of allying ourselves in a formal way with them. I mean, one of the things that really frustrates me during election time is when we see our unions putting out all this stuff about how Joe Biden is going to be the best president ever. He's going to be a union president. And I mean, I guess to be fair, he's the most, like you said, he's the most pro-union president that we've had since FDR. But that's like speaking to the problem rather than a compliment of Biden. And, when unions say things like that, I think it takes away from our credibility, because our members, I am not stupid. Like, I know that they're politicians and they're not that great, but our unions are acting like they are. And so what was the catalyst for this article? Like, what made you want to lay out the argument that I kind of recited there?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is a perpetual issue for the labor movement, and the overarching, the bigger issue, as you say, is like we always have to keep in mind that our power comes from ourselves. I mean, the power of the labor movement comes from organizing workers. That is the source of power of the labor movement. The source of power of the labor movement is not and never has been through electoral politics, and it's true that in a lot of cases, and I think for a long time in modern history, what you see is labor leaders leaning too much on electoral politics and not enough on organizing workers. And I mean, what really made me write this piece, even though it's an issue that's been around forever, was a few things happening in quick succession. One was that Barack Obama accepted a $100 million donation from Jeff Bezos, the Barack Obama Foundation, I should say.
Right.
$100 million from Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos to build a plaza named for John Lewis, the recently deceased congressman. And it was just one of those things that, I mean, do you think that Barack Obama is not aware of the Amazon union drive last year?
Right.
He was aware of it. Do you think Barack Obama was not aware that Jeff Bezos is a union buster? He's aware of it. He just doesn't care. It's just a demonstration of where the labor movement sits in the hierarchy of respect of these politicians. Another thing was with the ongoing Starbucks union drive has been a chance for everybody to remember the fact that Hillary Clinton was going to nominate Howard Schultz, the CEO of Starbucks, as her labor secretary. Yeah. Howard Schultz last seen going to Buffalo to beg his workers not to unionize,
beg them not to unionize because they work in a concentration camp, and that's why they shouldn't unionize.
Yeah, there were some Holocaust analogies in there that but I mean this was like the best that this was the good scenario that the labor movement was going to get had the Democrat won in 2016. So I mean. And then, Marty Walsh was down in your neck of the woods in Birmingham and didn't stop by and see the mine workers and actually has not appeared on a picket line during the big strike wave. And it's, so even here in this kind of this most pro-union administration that we've had in many decades, we can't get the labor secretary out on a picket line. It's a very low bar. And so we always have to remind ourselves that, while of course it makes sense that the labor movement is going to support Democratic politicians because they're not out to destroy unions and wipe us from the face of the earth, that's not where our power is ever going to come from.
Now, I will say, I believe that Marty Walsh went to a Kellogg's picket line in October. Was that, or was that not a picket line?
I don't know. Good question. I should check on that. I know that the agriculture secretary went to the John Deere picket line.
Okay. I think,
and I should check on Marty Walsh not to slander him.
Yeah, but I just looked, and I believe U.S. Secretary of Labor Marty Walsh speaks with Kellogg's workers on strike in Lancaster. So maybe he did or didn't go to the picket line. I don't know. But you're right that he didn't go to the Brookwood picket line, which did surprise me. I was there at both of the events that he was at in Birmingham. And the first one was, to promote the infrastructure bill. And then the second one, there was oh, man, what is that? And then the second jeez. What? Hello?
I'm here.
What happened?
I don't know.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Are we good? Are we back? Adam, do you know what that was?
I don't, but I can still hear Hamilton and you.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. I don't know. There was like super loud ringing in my ear. Hopefully y'all didn't hear that. But startled me a little bit. But he did.
That was Jeff Bezos.
That was Jeff Bezos. He did not like us the way that we were talking about
sending
him.
special brainwaves for your anti-Amazon rhetoric.
Yeah, and so there was like a luncheon at the RWDSU Union Hall that he spoke at, and there was some nice things that he did there. So he took like 30 minutes and talked to the Amazon workers that happened to be there, and told them some stories about what the unions have done for him, and that was kind of a really cool thing. But the mine workers were told that he was going to be in their neck of the woods, and so they came and they spoke to him, and basically I wasn't privy to the conversation, but they did say that they were able to speak to him, and they said that he said he was going to try to do something, but like you said, the picket line was 30 minutes away. I mean, there was no reason that he couldn't have gone to show some support. And in your piece, you mentioned that this is one of those strikes where, one of those long and drawn out strikes where it's really difficult to end in the favor of the workers without government support, especially when you look at the actual financial calculations that are happening here, because it's owned by multiple, trillion-dollar investment firms, and they have been willing to lose $400 million in revenue. If you look at where they're at now, $44 million in revenue versus where they were 2 years ago, when the price of steel was a lot lower, mind you, they're $400 less than where they were 2 years ago, and they're willing to just sit on that because, the thing that they said was they are leveraging their working capital. They're leveraging these other assets, and so if you can leverage trillions of dollars of assets, losing $400 million in 1 year, It's just an investment in the future and having a non-union workforce in the future. And so we need we need politicians who are fighting for us. But as you said, we don't have that in the Democrats, and we need to recognize that we're not going to get that by kneeling before them like we do. We're going to get that by being strong independently and having them kneel before us, basically.
Right. Yeah, we have to build our own power. And I mean, we have to think about where our expectations are as working people and as a labor movement. I mean, we're talking about the most pro-union president in many, many decades. And,
right.
we this is what we get from that. I mean, our expectations are in the gutter, and when you look at labor history, in a lot of cases, as you said, these long drawn out strikes, these big industrial strikes, a lot of times the thing that puts workers over the top and allows them to win was when the government weighs in on the side of the workers. And when the government weighs in on the other side, in many cases, the workers lose. So, I mean, this is a clear-cut, tailor-made case, the mine workers strike, for the Biden administration to step in and demonstrate, that commitment to organized labor that gets talked about a lot, but that the actual tangible results are pretty low at this point.
Right. That's exactly right. And, I think what you're talking about is having our priorities in order. And there was an old saying, I think that I even spoke about this last week, that I heard, and I can't remember the exact wording, but it was something about you can lose what you get at the bargaining table at the ballot box. It's something like that. And that's the order that you've got to think about it. I mean, that you have to win at the bargaining table before you can really affect change in the ballot box. And that's what we've seen throughout history, and that's what I think we're going to see going forward. We need if Democrats want to prove us wrong, then the stage is there for them to, but they're not.
Unions need to organize. We can't ultimately have power for working people when we're only 10% of the country. I mean, the number one thing that you need to do is organize. And then the political power will flow from that, not vice versa.
Right. Hamilton, I appreciate your time. Where can people find you online?
I am a labor reporter for In These Times, so that's inthesetimes.com. You can read the magazine. You can subscribe for a very affordable price, or you can look me up on Twitter at Hamilton Nolan.
Thanks again for your time, Hamilton. I really appreciate it. Hamilton is a really great labor reporter. I really appreciate his work. I try to read it as soon as it comes out. And so that's where we're going to leave y'all with. Organize, and union leaders out there that are listening, if you want to, you should give your PAC money to media projects that are for workers, like In These Times, like Strike Wave, that our friends up in the Northeast do, and even like the Valley Labor Report. That's going to be it for us here on WZZA in Tuscumbia, Muscle Shoals, Alabama. If you missed part of the show, you can find it online on YouTube or anywhere you find your podcast. We are on Twitter and Facebook at the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison. My co-host is Adam Keller, and we will see you next week.